Whenever players go and get involved in Mythic Plus or in the raid, they might start to enjoy the activity. They might start to think they want to put more time into this activity since they are kind of enjoying it at the moment. And then as they put more time, more effort, they try, for example, to be more competitive, they get hit by what is widely known as meta. They get hit by the idea that, of course, in this competition, when things get competitive, players try to find the best way to complete the activity, which is going to shape said activity by players choosing the specs, in this case, they think are the best for that challenge. So it creates a situation where players who were still at the time enjoying competing, for example, in Mythic Plus, right? They are greeted by a scene like this one, and they start wondering, damn, I was kind of having fun with my Fury Warrior. I was enjoying playing my Beast Mastery Hunter, but then they look at this and they realize, of course, that most players prefer to invite in their groups a Unholy Death Knight or a Balanced Druid. And once they reach a certain level of competition, of competitiveness, like a plus 13, plus 14, plus 15, by that point, well, they are no longer wanted. Because by that point, players are looking for the path of least resistance to success in a key, and therefore they try to go for the strongest of specs. For a long time, and this goes not just in Mythic Plus but also in the raid, for the same reasons, for a long time players have lamented this spread in value of specs, otherwise known as class balance, spec balance, the tuning of these specs in these activities, which can often sour the moment for many players that wanted to enjoy that activity as a certain spec. Like you enter, for example, the raid, you kind of wanted to play Holy Priest, for example, back when everyone was playing Discipline Priest, and once you reach a certain level, once you reach a certain point, you were going to be expected to be playing Discipline Priest, even if you yourself kind of wanted to play Holy instead, right? Now, one of the requests, often made requests by the player base, very often is the introduction of something known as a matchmaking system for Mythic Plus, right? It's the idea that, well, if it is players who are gatekeeping other players from enjoying Mythic Plus because they are too enslaved by the meta, what if we create a system that is going to completely bypass this by grouping us together randomly? So there's not going to be a chance for this key holder to deny and ignore all of the applicants, the Havoc Demon Hunters, the Arms Warriors, the Prot Warrior, the Guardian Druids, the Holy Priest, to only invite Discipline, Vengeance, Balance, and Unholy. Instead, if we have a matchmaking system, we simply queue up to this Mythic Plus key. We have our rating, our MMR, because we have completed, all 14 or all 15 keys. We have, 3.2k rating. We press Q, and then we get matched with a group of other players of similar score, which could be a Prot Warrior, could be a BM Hunter, could be an ensemble of players far more diverse than what the meta right now is, right? And to some players, this would be the solution to the current meta, by simply having a matchmaking system to do it for you. We bypass the human element of players being in charge of the recruitment of the players in their own groups, and we leave it to an AI system, an automated system which will put together players regardless of what the meta comp right now is. Now, this system has a few flaws, we can say, because even if you were to say the problem right now is all in the player base, it's the player base who chooses themselves to gatekeep each other, to just ignore several specs right now in the game because they want to go for the current meta strongest comp. The problem is that this matchmaking system would just hide, it would just cover what players are and were already thinking. Imagine Imagine you are queuing up for a 16 floodgate. Well, we're still talking about a pretty difficult dungeon. We are well below the 0.5% of players who have been completing 16 keys this season. You queue up for a 16, and then once the loading screen is over, you see yourself, as a very meta Unholy Death Knight, you see yourself matched with a BM Hunter, an Arms Warrior, a Guardian Druid, and a Holy Paladin. That is quite less than ideal. The only thing this straight-up matchmaking system will do is make players of meta specs more mad because they feel like they are being gate-kept by being grouped with non-meta weaker specs. And let's be honest, even non-meta specs would rather want to see themselves queued up and paired and teamed up with the meta specs whenever they join a group. So the idea of a matchmaking system to bypass the fact that a meta exists would really only just mask and cover what players are already thinking. It won't actually take it away, it won't actually fix it. There needs to be something else that helps fixing the meta, because right now there are some more naive, perhaps newer players who think the best way to fix the meta in the game is just buff all the weak specs to all be equal with each other, right? That's the take of the newcomer, just buff everyone to be equal. It has never happened in the history of this game, it will also never happen in the history of this game. That is not a very realistic solution. What could be more realistic though than this idea of a matchmaking system is to make something similar. To make something similar to a matchmaking system by using the MMR, the ELO of your character, depending on the keys you have done. However, you can start by weighting different players, different specs by the average score, average rating of each spec, to then give you a higher rating if you complete that dungeon. What this means, in short, is this. Imagine this is the current score of your specs in Mythic Plus, the average score of your specs, right? If you are in a group with Balance, plus Unholy, plus Arcane, plus Vengeance, plus Discipline, pretty much the average score by completing that key is from players with 360 score. So completing that score will give you 100 points. However, imagine having a group with a Windwalker Monk, an Affliction Warlock, a Havoc Demon Hunter, and then why not a Brewmaster Monk, and let's finish up with a Resto Druid. The average score now of your group is 3.1k. You are roughly 250 score average below the meta group. So while the top meta group got 100 points to complete that plus 17, you would be getting 100 points by completing a plus 16 or even a plus 15. So your equal score in MMR, your equal score in ELO to the top meta comp would be 1 or 2 keys lower, because your average score, the average score of your spec is far lower down than the average score of the meta specs. This would allow you to create an environment where the meta is not like every spec is equal. Every spec is very equally balanced. We live in this fantasy world where pretty much all specs are interchangeable because they do the same damage or they do the same healing. Instead, you live in a world where we all understand some specs are stronger than others, so you have this matchmaking system with versatile rating given to your keys depending on the strength of your spec, so that completing certain keys as weaker specs could give you similar rating as what the top groups are doing in higher key levels. For example, you see here the only 3 specs in the game for DPS who have been completing plus 20s are, what a surprise, Balance, Unholy, and Arcane Mage, right? So what about all of these poor guys only doing 18 max? This matchmaking system would simply make it so that pairing together a Windwalker, a Subrogue, and a Destrolock or an Affliction Warlock completing a plus 18 would give them the same score as these 3 completing a plus 20. You could split the Mythic Plus rating or / Mythic Plus rewards as well, so you would still allow these players to form their own manual groups and still push like you would be pushing keys now and get your title like you would be getting it now, and then you can let the other specs, who already know they're gonna be declined from these groups anyways, to join the Looking for Group Mythic Plus matchmaking system. You could get a similar Mythic Plus title for it, and you could give the impression for every player that all their specs are equal. They are equal because whenever you are grouped together, the score you will get at the end of the key will simply be based on the average power of each of the specs. This will help give players a reason to play Mythic Plus, right? Because right now, how many players would have the same story of I enjoyed Mythic Plus, I actually started kind of pushing, I got to all of my 12s done, I even got to my 13s done, some of these specs might even have gotten to all of their 14 keys done and got Resilient 14, but then eventually, one way or another, all of these other specs will have reached the same conclusion. After a certain point, I don't get invited anymore. I don't get invited as an Affliction Warlock, I don't get invited as a Marksmanship Hunter or as a Shadow Priest, because of course after a certain point players will start looking for the very meta-est of comps. With this matchmaking system, which is going to rate the power of your specs and give you a stronger, a better score based on how much weaker is your comp compared to the meta comp, basically, you will still feel like you can climb in Mythic Plus. You will still feel like you can continue to go up, gain more score, get towards a title reward, even as a spec who would normally, without this matchmaking system, normally not make it. Normally, most of these players will simply give up. Right? At some point you have two choices. If you really enjoy Mythic Plus, you have two choices. Either you reroll, either you go and play Vengeance, even if you enjoyed playing Guardian. After a certain key level, you just have to either play Vengeance or not play, or you quit. Or you quit Mythic Plus. You just don't play Mythic Plus anymore because you just went as high as you could on a Guardian Druid and you just can't find groups anymore. Under this different matchmaking system, you can still keep playing every day as a Guardian Druid. You queue up for this match-made system. Your average score as a Guardian Druid is 3,139, which is, well, more than 200 points below Vengeance. You will be matched with other, underplayed, weaker specs on average, like for example Holy Paladin, and then you will be matched with a Frost Mage, a Devastation Evoker, and a BM Hunter. And then if you complete that 16, for example, a 16 for which normally neither of these specs would have been invited, you will be able to continue to improve your score and increase your climbing in Mythic Plus. That is, I believe, the best way to keep everyone involved in Mythic Plus without the need to actually fix the meta, without the need to actually balance the specs. As we mentioned, the initial idea of, the best way to solve this problem is to make everyone equal, right? Players see this and they say, well, just fix it by buffing Arms Warrior, by buffing Fury Warrior, let's just buff BM Hunter. The problem is that eventually, even if, unironically, even if you were to make every single one of these specs equal, eventually one meta comp would emerge. Why? Because one of these specs would still have a better damage profile than the other. It would line up with like 2-minute CDs for PI or for big huge pools. Some of these specs would have uncapped AoE potential, like for example these top two, compared to some of the more AoE hard capped specs, and then you would have to go into survival. Not the actual spec, God forbid, the actual tankiness of each spec. So you might match the damage of an Unholy DK as a BM Hunter or an Arms Warrior, but you definitely won't match the tankiness, so you won't be chosen over the Unholy DK, right? So trying to chase this unreachable illusion of, well, the very simple solution is to make everyone equal and then the meta will be solved because everyone will have a chance to play, it will never work. It will never work. the best solution is to simply create a matchmaking system, an automated system which will pair players together and then value the score of your key based on how the average rating of each spec in that group is. The lower the average rating of the specs, the more points, the more MMR you will gain by completing that key. As mentioned, this would also be completely harmless for the hardcore top pushers of today. We are talking about these guys, right? To these guys, pretty much nothing would change. They will still be able to assemble their group as usual, right? Push their group as usual, get their title, get their keys done at this level by themselves. This matchmaking system would be more for players much lower down. Like, for example, let's go down to page 160. While we are doing 17s, actually we still see even down on page 160 very similar comps, but it starts to be a little bit more varied now. Let's now go even further down to page 260. Now we have 17s done. Now the colors are a bit more varied. It would help these guys way more, guys like Guardian Druids, like Prot Warriors, like Resto Shamans, like Hunters, for example, to be able to still feel like they can push groups, they can increase their score and do well, even without pretty much conforming to the current meta comp. You can definitely find a few of these already going into key level range with a completely different comp, but you can practically count them on your hands, the amount of groups that can reach this level. So this matchmaking system would help you make this much more approachable, much more attainable for the average player. The average player who gets discomforted because he sees his demo lock having no future in Mythic Plus, because he already sees he starts struggling to be invited into 14s, let alone getting into a 17 key. So this matchmaking system would help these disenfranchised specs have a place to play Mythic Plus without feeling the terror, without feeling the horror of being constantly ignored over the other main meta specs of today. In this case, for now, we have Vengeance, Discipline, Arcane, Balance, and Unholy. You just leave them in their own world of pushing their own key, find whatever, and then you and the rest of the other reject specs can just join together in the matchmaking tool and push keys together. This, I believe, would be the best way to bypass the existence of a meta. Bypass the existence of players, if left by themselves, will always try to pick the strongest composition if they want to be as competitive as possible. So eventually the weaker specs will be left behind, right? So this matchmaking system would very simply help all of these left behind specs have a place to congregate, have a place to play together. And you could ask, well, but why aren't they doing this already? Why aren't they just grouping up together? If they keep getting rejected, if they keep getting declined from high-level groups, why can't they just make their own group with blackjack and hookers? Well, because even those players right now are still trying to leech off of the meta comps. For example, across all of these groups now we are into 17 range, it's much more open. You still see things like, hey look, it's a Blood DK for once, and it's a Resto Shaman for once. Sure. But they're still running with an Arcane Mage, an Unholy DK, and a Balanced Druid. They're still keeping the super meta DPS comp. They just changed the tank and the healer, right? You have the Warrior here, but you still have the Disc Priest, you still have the Balanced Druid, you have the Blood DK again, but you still have the Disc Priest, you still have the Balanced Druid again. Here is a Prot Warrior, sure, but the Prot Warrior is still running with the same meta comp. Here's a Mystiver Monk, still running with the same meta comp, same again with a different warrior. So in many cases, it's not that they are running purely by themselves, it's just the same meta comp with one or two players extra. Like, for example, Ellesmere's group, which is just, in Holy Paladin jail, but besides that, it's just the same meta comp. Whereas this matchmaking system idea would allow all the other specs to be able to find a way to push, give themselves a reason to keep playing Mythic Plus even if they're not part of the meta comp, and even without having to, so to speak, fix the meta. try to reach this impossible goal of making everyone equal, everyone balanced the same, everyone with the same damage, the same burst, the same tankiness, the same raid buff, which we know really will just never happen. Instead, with this tweaked matchmaking system, you can kind of try to help all of these underplayed specs still find a way, a reason, some excitement to continue to play Mythic Plus. So yes, it is a matchmaking system, but it's not a straightforward one, like we have seen suggested multiple times. It's not like you queue up and you simply play with whoever you just join in, and everyone gets the exact same score for completing the plus 16, because this would create still way too much friction in the player base of players simply hoping to be matched together with one of the meta specs. And if they are not, they feel like they are being cheated by the AI, they are being cheated by the MMR, and you would end up in the same situation as many other games where players are convinced they are in elo hell because it's the game's fault, who is keeping them trapped with trash players, in this case with trash specs. This kind of matchmaking idea would kind of go away with that by simply matching you with specs that aren't even meta to begin with, and then increase your score based on just how weak were your specs that you just timed this key with. There is of course plenty of room to tinker and min-max this idea, the way this would work, but this feels like definitely the cleanest and classiest way you could think about adding the looking for group auto matchmaker system to Mythic Plus as well. You know, we're just throwing it out there for today, for this Thursday, perhaps for Blizzard to pick up one of these days and start thinking about this idea. If they want to increase the participation in Mythic Plus, if they want to continue to give players a reason to keep playing in Mythic Plus besides just re-rolling to one of the meta specs, this seems like one of the better ideas. So for today, on this Thursday, this was our PSA to the player base, the idea about this matchmaking system to keep everyone more than just the meta specs to still be excited about playing in Mythic Plus. Please go ahead and let me know what your solution would be about this to keep players entertained in Mythic Plus, even when they know they are not playing a meta spec. But for today, on this Thursday, this is all we had to talk about. So we're starting, as usual, our goodbyes by thanking everyone for having watched the video, together with, of course, everyone else who's been supporting completely for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, well, we can say that this yapping round went a tiny bit longer than expected. Yeah, we kind of went overboard with this.